Got this lock issue again, huh? What is up, folks? I'm gonna just move this phone around. Got the same little issue we had last time. It's weird. Usually it'll let me kind of maneuver the phone once the live starts and turn it into landscape mode, but last couple chats it's been a little bit fussy with me, so we'll just do it like this. All right. What is up? I want to get right into it. I know it's a couple of minutes before we're actually at 6 o'clock. I'll just kind of kick it off with just like a kind of a high level outline, of what some of the things that I want to cover. There's a lot going on in the world of boxing this week. A lot of new boxing news breaking. We have a 140-pound title holder, former undisputed champion Josh Taylor is no longer the undisputed champion. The WBA has stripped him. Obviously, they just announced Canelo versus Triple G3. Can't wait to get into that. I'm going to do a little brief recap on Benavidez, Lemieux, Bouatsi versus Craig Richards. Going to talk a little Janibek, Alim Kanuli. I'm going to get that right sooner than later. Haven't gotten the last name down just yet. I'm going to talk a little Jamel Herring versus Jermaine Ortiz and the apparent, or at least the seeming, retirement of Jamel Herring. Even going to touch a little bit on Floyd Mayweather versus Donnie Moore and Anderson Silva versus Bruno Machado, just very briefly, though. I am going to talk a little George Kambosos versus Devin Haney with no father trainer, Bill Haney, going out to Australia to accompany his son. Devin Haney's going to be up against it. Gonna talk some Gervonta Davis versus Romero. Obviously, that's the biggest fight taking place this weekend. Gonna get into a little Arislandi Lara versus O'Sullivan, Gary O'Sullivan. This is basically a 39, 40-year-old Arislandi Lara going up to middleweight. He's had a couple fights at middleweight now, but he hasn't fought a good middleweight opponent yet. I don't even know if I would consider Gary O'Sullivan a good middleweight. He's a pretty decent. Oh, you did. TJ called the Jermaine Ortiz win over Jamel Herring. So what was it? Was it the fact that Jamel Herring was going up to 135 in his mid-30s after taking that beating from Shakur Stevenson? Did you just kind of see the writing on the wall? Like, you didn't see his size scaling up well at 135? Either way, good call. Yeah, Spike is levels below. He is a journeyman. He's kind of a win some, lose some guy. But Arislandi Lara should win this fight, even at 39 years old. I just don't love his prospects at middleweight. And I'm thinking about doing a later in the week live chat about Arislandi Lara specifically. He's had a very interesting career, from him getting robbed in that, not literally robbed, but robbed on the scorecards against Paul the Punisher Williams, former multi-divisional champ. He was a super tall for his division fighter, but he had gotten a decision over Arislandi Lara that I thought Lara deserved. So everything from that to Lara fighting and barely losing a fight that it would have meant so much for his legacy were he to win. And that fight was against Jarrett Hurd. That was kind of a recent classic or near classic, Jarrett Hurd versus Arislandi Lara. But there's also Otto Wallin versus Rydell Booker. That one's actually taking place on Thursday. That's not going to be a Saturday fight. That's actually this Thursday. You know what? I really wanted to see Dillian White versus Otto Wallin. I'm glad that we got Tyson Fury versus Dillian White, and I get why Dillian White would much rather have fought for that title, that long-awaited title shot versus Tyson Fury, rather than fighting the, who the hell knows how good he really is, Otto Wallin, I also want to talk a little bit about the light heavyweight division today. I think that that's kind of sneakily becoming one of the best divisions in boxing. There's not, there hasn't been a huge footprint in recent years at light heavyweight. That's been one of the more international divisions. So many Eastern Europeans and so forth. But I want to talk a little 175 today. I already mentioned that I'm going to touch on Josh Taylor getting stripped of his WBA belt. So now he's just holding the WBC, and it looks like they're trying to push the Jose Zepeda title shot versus Josh Taylor, or else they would strip him of the WBC if he doesn't agree with that. Then you've got Jack Catterall on the other side saying, what about me? You said I was going to get my rematch. So it's going to be interesting to see how Josh Taylor navigates those waters. But I want to start off just saying, I hope that everybody is, kind of okay and trying to get through the super unfortunate news just in terms of the horrible school shooting, today in Texas. I just want to send my heartfelt condolences to anybody who was affected directly or indirectly. That's just astonishingly terrible news today. Also, rest in peace to Gary Russell Sr., the father of Gary Russell Jr., of all the Gary Russells that we've been seeing in the ring, from Gary Russell Jr., the one who just has the electrifying, some of the fastest hands in the sport, Gary Russell Jr., to Gary, either Antonio or Antoine, the one who we just saw fighting his biggest step-up fight and winning that very recently against Victor Postal. Rest in peace to Gary Russell Sr., the patriarch of the Russell family. Just an amazingly talented family. I mean, think about that. I mean, anytime you get, several brothers who are able to make the professional ranks at something, that's just some physical outlier type of DNA right there. So yeah, rest in peace to Gary Russell Sr. He was also their trainer for a long time. In fact, when Gary Russell Jr. entered the ring against Magsayo, Gary Russell Sr. was already in a wheelchair, so he wasn't able to be in the corner for his son the way that he had been for most of Gary Russell Jr.'s career. So yeah, one more time, rest in peace to Gary Russell Sr. His passing was announced earlier today. Thank you guys for coming in. TJ, what's up? Benny Bronx. Yeah, happy birthday to the champ, Hector Camacho. That's what's up. Benny Bronx, thank you for coming through. EK, what's good? SGK 23 TV Network, what's going on? Thank you for coming through. Who else do we have? Hot Facts with Robert Reese. Yeah, my man. We go back, Robert Reese and I. Check his channel out when you get a chance. Thank you for coming through, Robert Reese. Hot Facts with Robert Reese. Heck yeah. So, the biggest news that broke this week was obviously the announcing of Canelo versus Triple G 3. But I want to kick it off with a quick recap on David Benavidez versus David Lemieux. We pretty much knew David Benavidez was the huge favorite, was definitely supposed to win this fight. We were just looking to see if David Lemieux could make things interesting, if he could somehow, get a good punch in and hurt Benavidez. Maybe Benavidez would show a more patient boxing style out of respect for Lemieux's punching power. No. This was pretty much one person steamrolling the other. And credit to David Lemieux for showing a spirited effort. He just didn't have the munitions. He didn't have the guns to go to war with David Benavidez, who is just looking. He was always looking like a talented fighter, always had a lot of volume, always had a lot of power. But I'm paying special attention to his timing on his punches. I think that that's actually greatly improved in recent fights. And I think that I started noticeably seeing it against Anthony Durrell, two-time former champion at the Division 168, Anthony Durrell, when David Benavidez stopped him. But yeah, David Benavidez, they're going to have to get somebody very, very good in front of him, because, I mean, they're going to, start running out of cans to crush at some point, and he's just way too talented, way too dangerous to be fighting people who are either outsized in the case of David Lemieux, or just well below his skill level. I mean, we saw something similar with the new boogeyman of boxing, Janibek Alim Kanuli, when he just kind of rolled over Danny Dignam. I'm watching that thinking, what the heck is Danny Dignam doing in there with him? Like, I don't even know why that was the scheduled opponent. I get wanting a stay busy fight, but, I've got to look at who Danny Dignam beat to merit any sort of a shot. Even if you're just a far B-side, no-name opponent, you would want there to at least be some level of competitiveness in that. And we didn't get that with Janibek versus Dignam at all. I'm glad they stopped it when they did. But yeah, David Benavidez had made pretty easy work of David Lemieux. Begs the question, it's not going to be Canelo anytime soon. We know that, right? Because Canelo is going to be fighting Triple G next in September. I don't think it's going to be Jamal Charlo. He hasn't shown an appetite to want to go up and fight David Benavidez just yet. I do think he's going to find himself at 168. I just don't think that his first opponent is going to be David Benavidez. He seems to be very conscious of the size difference. I think that this is just my assessment based on the commentary and what the fighters are saying. I think that Charlo is not ducking, but I think he's being very mindful of how he approaches going to 168. Caleb Plant would also be a very good, that would actually be the fight that I want to see David Benavidez in next, because this kind of speaks to that whole era. It was a short era, but at 168, when you had Gilberto Zordo Ramirez holding one of the belts, you had Caleb Plant after he beat the guy who Uskata guy. After he beat Uskata guy, earning the IBF belt, then you had David Benavidez as one of the champs. And so that was 3 of the 4 champs. And I'm trying to think of who the fourth, Callum Smith was the 4th champ holding the WBA belt. So you had 4 champs without any inclination or any willingness to fight each other. You had 4 islands, 4 champs that were just taking their next mandatory. They got to a point where Caleb Plant's mandatories were like Mike Lee, Caleb Truax. Caleb Truax was the best of his 3 title defenses. Think about that. So we had 4 different 168-pound champs. Canelo comes through, takes all the belts. Granted, Zordo Ramirez had gone up. David Benavidez was stripped of his title, which is no fault of Canelo's, right? And then so he actually picked up 2 belts fighting Callum Smith because the WBC belt was vacant for that fight. And Callum Smith, as I mentioned, was holding the WBA belt. So 168, I think that if they make David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant, that would kind of right the wrong of that era in the division where none of the 4 champs, including David Benavidez and Caleb Plant, were fighting each other. So this would solve for that. I just really wonder whether Caleb Plant wants that difficult of a fight after getting the Canelo payday. Like, remember when Floyd Mayweather was, beating like the Robert, the Ghost Guerreros and the Victor Ortizes and fighters like, Maidana? You would see the fighter's career totally dovetail after getting that huge payday against Floyd Mayweather. It's almost like they lost the appetite to take on the difficult fights, to really go through the rigors of the sport after getting treated to a $1 million or multi-million-dollar payday. I'm seeing some of the same effect with fighters who fight Canelo. It'll be interesting to see what happens like with Billy Joe Saunders and with Caleb Plant. But I would love to see Benavidez versus Caleb Plant. Yeah, another relative of Russell. Yeah, Go Swang, thanks for coming through. Yeah, the Russells have had it really tough in recent years. It's really been sad just kind of witnessing some of the tragedy that's happened, with the family. Yeah, Benavidez might be a problem at that weight. You're saying Benavidez might be a problem at 175? Very possible, right? Because he just seems like a totally oversized 168. So I think that's very possible, especially because he has volume. Like when I'm thinking about him fighting, say, Dimitri Bivol, one of the problems that Bivol gives people is the volume that he puts on them, along with the sweet science boxing skill. But when you have David Benavidez, who just seems like doesn't he just seem like he's running downhill when he fights? It just seems like it's a snowball of activity when he starts picking up the volume. I think that's going to give a lot of people some trouble, even at 175. Like, wouldn't you love to see Benavidez, for instance, versus Zordo Ramirez, something like that? I think that he could probably beat Joshua Buatsi right now. Maybe. But yeah, I think he's going to be a problem at 175 when he inevitably goes there. Canelo should get down to 168 or stay at 168. Benny Bronx says, I wouldn't mind watching Jaime Munguia or Caleb Plant versus the Mexican Monster. Jaime Munguia, okay, I try to understand every fighter's particular plight. Like, I understand why they would pick this fighter and this opponent and this opponent. And Jaime Munguia has now turned down 2 chances being the mandatory opponent for Demetrius Andrade. That that is one of the more unfortunate avoidances. It's almost like Jermall Charlo's unwillingness to fight a title unification fight with Demetrius Andrade, or Ryan Garcia when he passed up on the title opportunity versus Devin Haney. I don't like it when there's like a kind of a blatant, yeah, I'd rather not take this, title opportunity or something like that. I just want to see Jaime Munguia in with a top 10, top 12-ish type of middleweight first. And, it seemed like they were this close to getting Charlo versus Munguia made. That would have been a very good fight. And I think Jaime Munguia is a fantastic talent. He's got power, super accurate punches, and plus the amount of punches that he's able to throw hard, round after round, even into the middle and late rounds, that's scary, right? So there's no reason from like a competitive standpoint why he shouldn't want to fight some of these guys. Now, to his credit, at least he's staying super busy. Like, he just booked another fight against a nobody, right? Like, he's going to be fighting in a couple weeks. He just fought, a few weeks ago or something, or very recently against Demetrius Ballard, which was another guy who didn't have any business being in the ring with Jaime Munguia. But I need to see something better than a Dennis Hogan, a Gary O'Sullivan, Toriano Johnson, the types of guys that he's been fighting. He's too good to be fighting some of the other guys that he's fighting. Like Demetrius Ballard, I did a preview on that, and I said in the beginning of the video, like, I almost don't want to even do this video because of how nonsensical this matchup is. So I want to see Jaime Munguia fight some of the best at 160. But yeah, I think that he's eventually going to be tough at 168. Let's see. We also had Joshua Buatsi versus Craig Richards. I'll go through this one kind of quickly. Buatsi did enough to just edge it out on the scorecard, I thought. I thought that he started strong for the first half of the fight. I thought that, Richards battled himself back into the fight. And even the early rounds that Buatsi was winning were kind of close. Richards, I suspected going into the fight that he would be a little bit too patient compared to Buatsi. Is that what's going on, Benny Bronx? Is Boo Andrade, Demetrius Andrade, pricing himself out of every fight? Because I had heard a similar thing with Devin Haney, right? He was fighting these kind of, easier opponents. Not to say that Jojo Diaz is an easy fight, nor is Jorge Linares, right? But it seemed like DAZN was paying well, right? For just your typical non-A-list opponents. It seems like they were paying relatively well. I don't think that they pay as well per fight as PBC, it seems. But it seems like they pay pretty well to where it kind of de-incentivizes somebody taking a tougher opponent. That's what seems to be the case. So I don't know if that's what's going on with Demetrius Andrade. But it does seem like other fighters don't like the risk-reward equation with Andrade. So, because here you have a southpaw who's got a long reach, who's got good boxing ability, very good boxing ability. He doesn't have as great of defense as I think he had, say, 5 years ago. I think that he's kind of showing his age a little bit, like where he's exchanging in the trenches a little bit more, getting a little bit more front foot heavy, offensive. But I don't think he's as sweet in the science as he was once upon a time. Even though he does make easy work out of some of his opponents. It's just frustrating to see his, at least his stated willingness to fight, Jermall Charlo, Triple G, which I get why a 40-year-old Triple G doesn't want to take on a tough fight. But it's like you fought Ryota Murata to try to marry 2 of the belts. Why not fight the WBC champ? Or the WBO champ in the case of Andrade, right? They were both on DAZN. That's what frustrates me, when you're both on the same network. I could get the cross-promotional fights not happening. You get the business of that, right? Just promotionally and how everybody is kind of their own island. It almost feels like Matchroom and then PBC and then, Top Rank, that it might as well be UFC, Bellator, and the different, bodies, the different companies that have no cross-promotional efforts, right? But when you're on the same platform and are still unwilling to fight the other elite guys, that bothers me. Yeah, Benjamin Tucker, what up? My cousin Benji in the house. Like, we talk boxing, we get on FaceTime and phone calls, and we'll just chop it up and talk boxing. Thank you for coming through, cousin. Love you, man. Yeah, rest in peace to Gary Russell Sr. Yeah, I actually had kicked this one off with that. Somebody had brought up the continued tragedy that's happening in the Russell family. Gogo Swang had mentioned that another relative of Russell was recently murdered. It's just a very, very tough go. Yeah, okay, so Triple G, look, I get why he wants to hold out for the Canelo fight. If nothing else, his performances in the first two Canelo fights merit a third mega payday. So I get that. It's just that it's frustrating from a competitive standpoint that he isn't fighting the other middleweight champions, basically, other than Ryota Murata, but even earlier in Triple G's career, I feel like, there was Dmitry Pirog. Some of you guys might remember him. He was another undefeated champion. It was like Kid Chocolate, Billy Joe Saunders. There were certain top middleweights at the time. And Pirog, several years ago, was supposed to be the guy who, young, in his prime, in his physical prime, Triple G was supposed to lock horns with. But the undefeated Pirog ended up sustaining like a nagging back injury that just wouldn't relent, ended up forcing him to retire. So actually, Pirog is the guy who knocked out Daniel Jacobs when Jacobs was still young. That was, for a long time, Daniel Jacobs' only loss. So I feel like for the first half of, Triple G's career, when he was beating Curtis Stevens and Willie Monroe Jr., and I think probably like Matthew Macklin, Andy Lee, those guys. Who's the other one who's pretty good? Martin Murray, I think he fought. I know Chavez Jr., Sergio Martinez beat Martin Murray. But all that to say, I feel like there was some missed opportunity during Golovkin's, basically from the age of 23 to the age of 32. I think that there was a lot of missed opportunity there, and that somewhat hurts his legacy. Yes, I was tuning into all of his, just crushing this guy, crushing that guy. And when he just went on that like 20-something knockout streak, fighting on HBO every few months and just delivering madness and pain to his opponents. But from a opponent quality standpoint, with the exception of the Canelo fights and the Daniel Jacobs fight and maybe a couple of others, there really isn't a ton there, which is unfortunate given his talent level and given how great he's been for as long as he's been great. He just hasn't had enough fights to really boost the legacy. And then you couple that with those unfortunate calls against Canelo Alvarez, and you have like an A- level elite career versus an A+ level elite career. SGK 23 Triple G PEDs 9 years ago. So did he ever test positive? I don't remember. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember Triple G testing positive for any PEDs. MAW in the house. I caught you in what was it? Boxing Waves live stream, I think, right? Yeah, heck yeah, man. Good to see you. Good to see you. Thanks for coming through. And I believe you are in Australia. Is that right? Yeah. Platform. Yeah, if you have another top fighter in your platform, unify. That's the name of the game. That is the name of the game. I get that there is obviously the business component. It is prize fighting at the end of the day, but you do want to see the fights that matter happen. So yeah, I get it. I get that Gervonta Davis has no great competition under the PBC banner at 130, 135, or 140, really. So that's why they've had to get super creative with his matchmaking. But yeah, if you got top level competition and you're not wanting to fight them in the same platform, that's not cool. He stepped up and went 12 rounds, and yeah, I agree with that. I want to see Andre versus Daniel Jacobs. That would be a good one. Andre versus Daniel Jacobs would be a good one. And Daniel Jacobs, it might be the type of name that Andre needs to beat to say, okay, I'm better than initially. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was on mute. Yeah, you know what? Next time I'm gonna flip that up. Somebody had actually called me. Can you guys hear me now? I see it. Are we good? Cool, cool. Yeah, let me know if I'm still. I make good points when you're on mute. EK, what's up? So I touched on the Janibek versus Dignam for a minute. Janibek is obviously Demetrius Andrade's mandatory. Do you think Demetrius Andrade is going to fight Janibek? I know that he was going to go up to fight Zach Parker at 168. I don't think Demetrius Andrade is going to defend his title against Janibek. And same reason you could justify it with other people. I get why. Even though if you beat Janibek now, right now, you earn enough cred to where the boxing world would be calling for others to fight you a little bit more emphatically, because now it's not the Liam Williams you're beating. It's this guy who I think is going to have a tough time getting big fights himself. I don't think people are going to be lining up to fight Janibek anytime soon. I mean, he's looking very dangerous. But if Andre did want to just like say, you know what, screw it, let's do it, and then end up beating Janibek, that would be great. The problem is, I don't think that he would be happy with his pay given the risk. So yeah, maybe he would price himself out of that one happening. But if it's not Andrade, then Andrade would then have to vacate the title, which means that Janibek would be fighting another person for the vacant WBO 160-pound title. It's going to be interesting to see who that person is. Eubank Jr. versus Demetrius Andrade, that would be a very good one. Yes, that would be a very good fight. And Eubank, like Andrade, was on it was on DAZN. I don't know. Well, Andrade technically isn't on DAZN, but he could get right back to DAZN if he wanted to. I'm sure Eddie Hearn would be like, yeah, sure, let's try to work it out. But I don't think Eubank Jr., just given the types of fights that he's been fighting and hearing who Eubank Jr. has been calling out, like he wanted to fight Kell Brook. I don't think Eubank Jr. is going to fight Demetrius Andrade. Even though back in the day he did fight like Billy Joe Saunders and he's fought, George Groves. He's fought good fighters. I don't think he's going to fight Andrade. Edward Espinoza, what's good? Thanks for coming through. Heck yeah. So Janibek, is the boogeyman. Demetrius Andrade, is going to be interesting to see how the WBO handles that, because they had the policy where you get to get right in line if you are the WBO champ at one weight class, one division. They have the policy where you could go up a division and challenge a champion over there. So, Demetrius Andrade, right now he's nursing his, shoulder injury, I believe, right? I hope it's not too debilitating, because he is getting into, like, what is he now, 34 years old? It's now or never in terms of him securing a big fight. Jamel Herring just lost to Jermaine Ortiz. It looks like Semper, the former Marine, is going to be calling it a career, and not a moment too soon. I mean, he was competitive against Jermaine Ortiz, but in the rounds, in the middle to late rounds, it just looked like he was not gassed, but he was unable to throw competitively enough combinations to keep himself in the fight round by round. So, you were a former champion. You got beaten up pretty badly against Shakur Stevenson. Now you're losing one division up to lesser competition. It's not like Jermaine Ortiz is a top 135er. So yeah, maybe it is time. And he's cited family, just wanted to be around there. So yeah, job well done. And yeah, I hope he finds peace of mind in retirement. Seems like a pretty stand-up quality dude with a lot of integrity. So yeah, he's one of those fighters that's easy to root for, easy to like. One of the funniest things I've heard, boxing commentary-wise, took place in Jamel Herring versus Shakur Stevenson. It was when Jamel Herring threw that, after getting pasted with like 12 punches in a row, Jamel Herring threw like a quick, and then Andre Ward said, you see what he tried to do right there with that jab? He tried to throw a jab and have that same hand come back for defense all at the same time. It's not a good look, fellas. And then Timothy Bradley and Mark Kriegler who started laughing at that. But yeah, he had a tough go against Shakur Stevenson. I'm going to let you guys make the call on this one. Does anybody want to hear anything on Mayweather versus Donnie Moore or Anderson Silva versus Bruno Machado? Look in the comments to see what you say about that. But I want to get right into them making Canelo versus Triple G3. September 17th is the date. Let me check out a couple of the comments real quick. Andre versus Gabe Rosado would be interesting. Okay, so Benny Bronx. Gabe Rosado at this point, after getting beat by Shane Mosley Jr., which, in full disclosure, Shane Mosley, when I was a kid growing up, Shane Mosley was my favorite or second favorite fighter throughout most of his career. Love Shane Mosley. But I've been watching his son as well, and I would see his son fighting these fights, and I'm like, yeah, he just doesn't have that. Whatever Shane Mosley had that allowed him to throw that right hand that quickly and throw that left hand that quickly and violently and just this Junior doesn't have that, right? But then you start seeing his more recent fights and you see that he's, developing more technical skill, but then you're thinking, okay, well, what's the end game here? I don't see any scenario where he ends up being, you could become a belt holder by winning the right fights when there's like a vacant opportunity or something like that. But I don't see any scenario where Shane Mosley Jr. is a top 5 or top 10 fighter in his division. But he did just come off the most impressive fight of his career by far, beating Gabe Rosado. So at this point, after losing to Rosado, and then before that, losing to Munguia, which, it was a firefight, but man, that was a bludgeoning at the hands of Jaime Munguia. Yes, Rosado has a ton of heart, but damn, that was a beating, a long beating. He stuck in there. But after losing to Shane Mosley Jr., I don't think that that's a attractive fight for Demetrius Andrade, unless Andrade thinks that it's going to, be an easy fight and a name, and in that sense, making sense for Andrade, something like that. But I don't see Gabe Rosado, even though he did recently knock out Bet Bully Melikuziev and, shocking the boxing world with that one. I think that was more a exception rather than the rule. I have a lot of respect for Gabe Rosado. I remember him fighting competitively with Jermel Charlo, way back in the day, and fighting. I remember when he was hanging in there tough against Prime Triple G. That was a nasty fight. And I remember his trainer saying, hey, he's going to die in there, telling his dad, no, I'm going to stop this fight. He's going to die in there if we don't stop the fight. And then, he was just a bloody mess at that point. Have tons of respect for Gabe Rosado. I don't think that he's at a level right now where he could be competitive or very competitive with Demetrius Andrade, just giving the career trajectories. I could be wrong, though, but that's just my read on that. Munguia could have fought Andrade or Charlo already. Yeah, I touched on that a little bit earlier. Munguia, to me, it's been a little bit frustrating seeing his opponent-by-opponent selection, especially when he's had opportunities. He's had title opportunities right in front of him, and he said, no thanks, I'm going to fight this guy. Then he's got a fight this close with Jamal Charlo being made, and then Golden Boy is going to say, even though Jamal Charlo is the champion, the WBC champ, saying, no, this isn't going to be on Showtime or Showtime pay-per-view, nothing like that. We're only going to do this if it's on DAZN. So, I get wanting to throw your weight around as a promoter and using whatever leverage you have, but that just seemed like, I'm throwing the challenge flag on that one. That did not add up. That was, for as competitive as Oscar De La Hoya was throughout his career, fighting nothing but the best, fighting all the best fighters in the era that you could think of. It's just interesting that he takes a very different approach when matchmaking. And I get that he's not directly matchmaking, but he's got influence at Golden Boy still, obviously. He doesn't treat his fighters, his up-and-coming fighters, the same way that he himself handled his career in his opponent-by-opponent selection. And I don't think that, Jaime Munguia is scared of any of these guys. I just think that that was a BS business move to pull out of a potential title fight between Jermall Charlo and Jaime Munguia. I think Jaime Munguia would be very competitive with Jermall Charlo. Like, I would have to think long and hard before I decide who I think would win. I think I would lean Charlo, maybe, but the volume and the strength and the endurance and the fact that he's able to do it throughout the fight, after seeing Jermall Charlo, granted, I don't think he was super motivated against Montiel in his last fight. I think he would prepare for Munguia a lot better, but that wasn't a great look for Jermall Charlo. So I would have loved to see Jermall Charlo versus Jaime Munguia. Ricky Conley, thank you. Thank you for enjoying the channel, man. Thank you for any and every video that you've ever seen on the channel. I really appreciate that. And thanks for coming through here as well. Benny Bronx says, Andre to me is a throwback. Friday night fights on ESPN type fighter, not a pay-per-view sell. And is that like a stylistic thing? I mean, I've seen him knock some guys out. But, I remember seeing young Andre, with the short hair. And I went back when he was supposed to fight, like, Jamel Charlo, and they were both at 154. I remember not, loving his fight style, even way back then. But it's like, you've gone through, 8 years now of being an elite fighter, and you have no very high-quality, credible name. Not credible is not the word. He's fought credible guys. No important fights that matter. No big names on his resume. And that just speaks to the rotten politics of boxing, really. A big no from Benny Bronx on Mayweather versus Donnie Moore or Anderson the Spider, my favorite MMA fighter of all time. Anderson the Spider Silva versus Bruno Machado. I get it. But I would do a preview video if they do, in fact, make Jake Paul versus Anderson Silva. I'm just putting that out there. I would do a preview on that. Canelo versus Triple G3. A lot of people are calling this a duck for Canelo. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, how it would be business and financial malpractice if Canelo passed up on a Triple G3 fight for September after this Dimitri Bivol fight. I think Canelo's pretty much proven that he's willing to take on any tough assignment. You don't fight, when they announced him against Bivol, I'm like, word? You're going to fight Dimitri Bivol? One, he doesn't even have a huge name, and two, he might beat you. Canelo has shown, and I get, I know Benjamin Tucker doesn't love Canelo's fight-by-fight schedule, and he, like a lot of people, thinks that, the 168 rampage, we'll call it, was an illusion. Just doesn't have a lot of, it doesn't think that those are A+ or A-level elite fighters at 168. And so when Canelo kind of fummed his way through that division, some people think that was an outstanding, amazing accomplishment. Some people think hey, pump your brakes. It's a little bit less than that. I thought it was amazing. I didn't see anybody doing that to Callum Smith, before Canelo came to the division. I saw John Ryder. I thought John Ryder should have beat Callum Smith, but the way that Canelo just walked him down and just manhandled him, that was something else. And then the way he just broke, Billy Joe Saunders' face, knocked Caleb Plant out. Canelo just went to 168 and gave 3 fighters. And not to mention the Avni Yildirim fight, which, Avni Yildirim, he's not a bad fighter. He looked bad against Canelo, but I saw Avni Yildirim fight a very close and competitive fight with 2-time former champ Anthony Durrell. He just looked like a scrub against Canelo Alvarez. But Canelo gave 3 people at 168 their first L. So sometimes when you're measuring greatness and you're looking at fighters, look at how many O's in the loss column they took away from their opponents. When somebody is handing a lot of good fighters their first loss, I think that that's a pretty big deal. So Canelo's proven that he's willing to take the toughest fights. I think he deserves, he owes it to himself to fight a third fight with Triple G. And I think that Triple G, again, his performances in those first 2 fights against Canelo Triple G deserves the payday he's about to get in this third fight. Do I think he's got a good chance at beating Canelo? You know, after seeing Canelo versus Triple G 1, and when we were going into the rematch, I didn't love Triple G's chances, even though I thought that he beat Canelo in the first fight, because I thought that even though he should have beaten Canelo in the first fight, he should have been awarded the decision in the first fight, I saw the Canelo performance as having emboldened Canelo Alvarez, like, yeah, I could take this guy. I thought that that's how much Canelo would be emboldened going into the rematch. Not to mention, Triple G was already like 36 years old, so I'm thinking it's only downhill from here for Triple G, and Canelo is just in that sweet spot of his career where he's never been better. And then we still got that sensational second fight where it's split. The public is split on who deserved the win in the rematch. I thought that it could have gone either way. I have no strong argument to make on how the rematch should have been scored. I do on the first fight, but not so much the second fight. That one was kind of a pick'em. It was a very interesting fight, to say the least, especially because of how Canelo fought that fight, and just seeing a killer like Triple G relegated to throwing so many jabs to edge rounds and to win rounds. I just wasn't used to seeing that type of approach from Triple G. But yeah, the third fight's going to take place. You know, 3 weeks ago, or I'll say a month and a half ago, I would have said Canelo via stoppage in the trilogy fight. I think I'm still leaning Canelo via stoppage in the trilogy fight. But if Triple G's really paying attention, and not that Triple G can implement Dimitri Bivol's game. First of all, he's not 6 feet, 6'1". 2, he's not 175 pounds. He's not even 168 pounds. This will be his first fight in that division. I don't think that spells great news for Triple G, a career, 160 guy, more or less. But if he's looking at Dimitri Bivol and he doesn't throw, he throws similar volume, but it's a different type of volume than what Dimitri Bivol throws. And I don't think he, at this stage of his career, has Dimitri Bivol's footwork to be able to measure range the way that he used to, really. Like, if you want to see a fight just totally controlled by a jab, look at Triple G versus David Lemieux. Before he started piling on the power punches, look at his distance and range control against David Lemieux. That was pretty brilliant. But if he's watching Dimitri Bivol closely, you've got to, think, okay, I have to, and he already knew this, exercise the hell out of the jab. You've got to make the jab a big, big issue in this trilogy fight. Second, I really don't know what Triple G can do to win the fight. First, to win the fight any more than you might have thought he did in any of those first two fights. I don't know with what the version of Triple G that just fought Ryota Murata can do to beat Canelo Alvarez at this point. Catch him with something big. That's always the easy answer. And obviously jab and move. But I'm getting so used to seeing Triple G taking that big breath, and man, even if you think he fell in love with his power and started loading up on bombs a little too much and wasn't trying to win the jab battle as much, I think Canelo really, really prepared for Dimitri Bivol. I just think that the type of treadmill that Dimitri Bivol's activity kept Canelo on, kept Canelo, kind of gassed and unable to keep his foot on the gas during the second half of the fight. We saw Canelo start resting on the ropes in like the middle rounds, which was a terrible sign. I don't think Triple G at 40 now, can fight the same style of fight that he fought in Canelo versus Triple G 1, where we saw a lot of Canelo's back against the ropes and Canelo trying to buy time here and there to move to the other side of the ring, buy like 3 to 5 seconds, catch your breath, and then just try to like steal around with a flurry type of deal. I don't think Triple G can launch an effective, sustained attack over the course of several rounds with Canelo at this point. But I do think that this was the fight to make. I think that anything less would have been Canelo doing himself a disservice. It will be interesting to see where he goes from that fight should he beat Triple G. So they haven't made Benny Bronx. They haven't made Amanda Serrano versus Taylor 2. It sounds like they might move away from that one. I heard, I try to listen to kind of like the coded language when I hear like Eddie Hearn talk, because Eddie Hearn will say what he's saying, but then there's always like what he's trying to say, sort of subliminally. And when he was talking about Serrano versus Taylor 2. He said, yes, that is the biggest fight to make. Yes, that is the fight to make as long as everybody's reasonable. And then he started getting into the financials of the fight. He started saying it wasn't a huge money maker. I mean, it was a great spectacle for the sport of boxing, but he's basically saying they can't ask for as much money as I think they're about to ask for if we want to get Katie Taylor versus Serrano anytime soon. That's what I gathered from it. Big Cheese. What's going on? Hello. Thanks for coming through. Thank you for joining us. Leo, what is good? Thank you for coming through. Oh, yeah, I definitely want to get into that. And that's actually where we were going next after the Canelo versus Triple G3 being next news. George Kambosos versus Devin Haney. Like, on the fight calendar, this one, along with Beterbiev versus Joe Smith Jr., along with maybe Stephen Fulton versus Roman, along with, Anthony Joshua versus Usyk, or Usyk Joshua 2, whenever they make that one official. I can't wait. I can't stop thinking about George Kambosos versus Devin Haney. Like, that's the fight that I think has been just on my mind the most. And now when you throw in the fact that father trainer Bill Haney probably won't be taking the trip to Australia, and, Yoel Judah is going to be taking his spot, Zab Judah's father and trainer. Also, Devin Haney's godfather. And I didn't know this, but Bill Haney and Yoel Judah are god brothers. That's interesting. I didn't always know that Bill Haney was from Oakland, was from the Bay. But I really think Devin Haney's up against it. And it's funny because if you were to ask me 9 months ago, Devin Haney or George Kambosos, it would feel like a no-brainer. And obviously that changes when you see George Kambosos perform the way that he did against Teofimo Lopez, who many thought was looking like the most impressive fighter in the division. I mean, his hair trigger quickness, the way that he could just put your lights out at any given moment. Like, you saw how tepid and reluctant Lomachenko was before he was crashing the pocket. He was in no rush. Like, compared the way Lomachenko fought Teo to how he fought Richard Comey and Nakatani, right? Totally different can of worms. But the more I start to overthink Kambosos versus Teofimo Lopez, I'm thinking, okay, so how much of that is George Kambosos' just talent and skill and ability, and how much of it was Teofimo Lopez undertraining, not respecting George Kambosos, and frankly, disrespecting the game. Like, the way that he came in that first round, I had never seen Teofimo Lopez fight like that. Even when he was fighting lesser competition, I didn't see Teofimo Lopez fighting that recklessly, where he just thought that, he was just walking on water and could come in and just clean the guy up in the first round and first couple rounds. That's that. I mean, they had remade the fight, postponed and remade, Teofimo Lopez versus Kambosos 6-7 times. It was ridiculous. But seeing Teo's approach to him versus Kambosos makes me wonder how much of that was illusion. And that's not to take credit away from George Kambosos. When you're introducing the idea of how much of that was this person and how much of that was that, George Kambosos still had to do what he had to do. And he had to face adversity because he did get dropped. And Teofimo Lopez did start fighting a more intelligent fight beyond that point. And Teofimo Lopez dug so deep. He had to dig super deep to keep that fight super competitive, which he did. He actually made it a very competitive fight. I don't think he won the fight by any stretch of the imagination. So when you see his reaction and then his comments afterwards, that makes me kind of worry about Teofimo Lopez's, like, you know, his mindset. And I don't want to call him delusional, but it just isn't right. And I feel like he knows better. But George Kambosos throws fast combinations. You've got a generally defensive-minded Devin Haney, who is the proverbial back foot fighter. This is going to be a raucous crowd. This crowd is going to be unbelievably loud, and they're going to be loud just for George Kambosos, right? So Haney's going in there, traveling across the world without his trainer, his dad trainer, and he's going to be in this environment where, you know, sometimes you're watching a fight, even with a trained eye, and it's not until you look at the slow replay that you realize, and it took me this rewatching Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano 1, seeing, oh, that punch didn't land, or part 2, that punch didn't land the way that I thought it did in real time. I thought that those would landed. You're watching the fight, then you see it in slow motion, or watch the replay, and you're like, damn, he kind of caught that. He missed that. You have none of that nuance when you're judging the fight, and you're influenced by this crazy crowd that anytime George Kambosos jumps into the pocket, starts letting his hands go, it's gonna sound like a walk-off home run in a baseball stadium. Like every time Kambosos comes in, you're gonna have a bunch of chants. You're gonna have like all this stuff going on, and then you've got the relatively patient Devin Haney. Like the sweet science, you don't get any sweeter of science than Devin Haney, where you have to be like a real connoisseur of the sport to really even appreciate the guy's skills. I don't know how that's going to translate onto the scorecards. And you know, for the sake of fairness in the scoring, I don't want to sound jaded, but that is kind of impacting how I'm viewing the fight. Like if I were to put my money down, I was looking at odds and I saw Devin Haney was the favorite. I'm like, I mean, I get it, because again, if you were to ask any of us like a year ago, how is this fight going to play out, or better yet, who wins it? The answer would be Devin Haney. We're not so sure right now, and that's without the crowd influence. We're not so sure. If you're thinking like I'm thinking this is going to be a very competitive fight. I don't even know who has the hand speed edge. I would have thought Devin Haney did around the time, you know, Kambosos was fighting Mickey Bay and Lee Selby. And then, look, I don't look at Devin Haney as having blazing hand speed. He's not Gary Russell Jr. I don't even think he has as fast hands as Gervonta Tank Davis, right? But he's got pretty fast hands. I don't know if he has faster hands than Ryan Garcia. But George Kambosos, and I could be wrong, this could be a situation where I'm thinking like the hand speed is equal, or George Kambosos might even have a slight hand speed advantage, especially when you couple that with him being a combination puncher versus a 1-2 punches at a time type of puncher. But sometimes when you then see the guys get in the ring, what you thought you were going to see, whether it's like the size or the hand speed, it's like, oh, that's not looking like I thought that it was going to look. He's looking a lot faster in the ring than I imagined. When I saw Ricardo Mayorga against Vernon Forrest, and I saw him take the title from Vernon Forrest, who had taken the title from Shane Mosley and then beat him again in the rematch, Mayorga looked a lot faster than I thought he was going to look. To say I can't wait for this fight's an understatement. It's a hugely important fight. And if Devin Haney is able to go into that environment and come out with the belts, yes, he's already contractually obligated to go back into an immediate rematch in Australia again. But if he's able to get out of this George Kambosos situation with the belts, that will mean that he has won twice or won the first one and drew. Getting by, you could get by with a draw in the rematch and still come out with the titles. But damn, that would be a huge, huge accomplishment. Especially given it sounds like they knew or had an idea that Bill Haney wasn't going to be going out to Australia or wasn't going to be cleared to go, but that would be a huge accomplishment. And if George Kambosos beats Devin Haney, whether it's controversial or clear, that would be a huge, just a game changer. Every bit as much as him shaking up the boxing landscape by beating Teofimo Lopez, if he then beats Devin Haney, then that's one of those like, any boxing expert who thought they knew a damn thing about would be like, man, like just when you think you know something, it's like this guy who I thought Lee Selby beat, edged a decision against, George Kambosos, ends up beating Teofimo Lopez and then Devin Haney. Like nobody would have expected that. So I think that this is definitely one of the most important fights that are coming up. I mean, it's one of the biggest fights, one of the most important fights coming up. Just hugely consequential. And, you know, George Kambosos, one thing that he does so well, and I wonder how this is going to translate versus Devin Haney, is every time Teofimo Lopez wanted to turn the tide back into his favor and started landing a couple good combinations and started like coming on basically, where it's like, okay, this is a little bit more like what I expected, you know, Teo to fight like. It's like George Kambosos would be like, okay, noted. And then in the exchanges, he would make sure that he got the last punch, the last laugh, you know, and he would just demonstrate to the judges, to the crowd, to the viewing audience, no, I'm in control here. Anytime Teo started making more headway, even when George Kambosos got dropped, he wasn't getting beaten up after that. He reasserted himself pretty quickly. So I'm thinking, if Devin Haney is going to beat George Kambosos, what is it going to look like? Like, is it going to be him just controlling range and being able to pop, jab him? And then when Kambosos jumps in with fast, you know, you could tell George Kambosos has been a Manny Pacquiao sparring partner, right? Just like the way that he throws the combinations. But is it going to be a situation where Devin Haney is going to be so skilled that he is able to technically reduce George Kambosos' punch output? I mean, maybe that's one way that it could go down. It's just hard to picture because I've seen him now against, you know, Jojo Diaz and Linares. I think Devin Haney is a very, 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 very good fighter. I don't know yet if he's a great fighter, but I think that it would take a great fighter to win this fight in Australia against George Kambosos, given the styles, given the fact that George Kambosos does have a more fan-friendly style, and he's not Yorkie's Gamboa. I don't think that Devin Haney's just going to be able to tame him and keep him on the outside. I feel like even if Devin Haney is winning rounds, I don't think that simply edging a round will be enough to award him that round on the scorecard. I think that he is actually going to have to like win in a similar way that that Shakur Stevenson was winning the round against Oscar Valdez, or something where it leaves no doubt to reliably get credited with a series of rounds. That's kind of what I foresee here. And again, it's just hard to picture how he's going to reduce George Kambosos' willingness to keep on jumping in. I mean, one way to reduce it is just by knocking the hell out of the guy, but it's easier said than done. If I had to put money down right now, I'm going to do a preview like in the next couple days, but I think I'm actually leaning George Kambosos via like, you know, split decision. I think it's going to be a very, very close fight, you know, to us, the viewers, and on the cards. I think it's going to be close. I just don't know which way it's going to go, but just knowing what I know and seeing what I've seen, I think that the smart money would actually be George Kambosos edging a decision, even if there is a lot of money in Devin Haney winning and then them doing the rematch in Australia. So there is that money component, but I feel like it wouldn't be out of the question that I witness a 7 rounds to 5 type of win for Devin Haney, but it results in a split decision loss for Devin Haney, something like that. That's at least how I'm kind of processing it right now. But I'm going to think about that a little bit more. Shakur Stevenson beats all of them. Like, look, from a skill standpoint, Benny Bronx, I could see it, but Shakur Stevenson is like 5'7", and that would be putting it kind of generously. And it's weird. Sometimes you'll see a fighter listed at one thing, like I watched like an old Shane Mosley fight, like before he was ever even champion, and they listed him at 5'9". It's like, when have you ever seen Shane Mosley looking 5'9", right? I remember like my dad had met Floyd Mayweather when he was still Pretty Boy Floyd at an airport, And my dad was like, yeah, he's about 5'7", no more than definitely no more than 5'7", maybe 5'6", but no more than 5'7". But what? After Floyd beat Oscar, it's like he was listed at 5'8" for the rest of his career. Shakur Stevenson might simply not be big enough to really crack with, and I get it, Gervonta Davis is shorter than Shakur Stevenson, but Gervonta Davis is also Gervonta Davis. Shakur Stevenson, from a skill standpoint, might be able to beat all these guys. I simply don't know. I'd have to see how he handles, damn, I'm trying to picture him against Ryan Garcia, against Vasily Lomachenko, because that's really the one I want to see. I want to see Shakur Stevenson versus Lomachenko. But I want to see Tank Davis versus Lomachenko, so go figure. Zepeda, thank you. Leo DeBrow, and let me know how to pronounce that. DeBrow just broke some news. Jose Zepeda versus Josh Taylor just got announced. So I said at the beginning of the live stream, Josh Taylor was just stripped of one of his belts. It was the WBA that stripped him. And Albert Puello was the mandatory for Josh Taylor, who won all the belts at 140 and controversially was gifted a decision win against Jack Catterall. At worst, it should have been a decision. It should have been a decision draw at worst. At best for Catterall, a win for Catterall. I don't see how Josh Taylor won that fight, but he came out with all the belts. WBA just stripped him, and I guess he had a decision to make. Are you going to honor your word? Because I think Josh Taylor wants to fight Jack Catterall because he wants to silence all the doubters. Everybody who basically took Josh Taylor out of their pound-for-pound top 10. Josh Taylor's the type, he's got a lot of pride. He's like, okay, I think he wants to fight Jack Catterall, but the WBC just gave him an ultimatum, so he has to kind of hold it down and fight Jose Zepeda. So you're going to see Jack Catterall say that Josh Taylor's not a man of his word. He's going to say that he's ducking, but this was just hey, I'd rather hold on to my belts type of decision. I'd rather go into the Jack Catterall rematch with the WBC belt as well as the IBF and WBO, and not just the IBF and WBO belts. It's bad enough he already got stripped once. So Josh Taylor versus Jose Zepeda, that's going to be a very good one. We've seen Jose Zepeda recently fight the fight of the year against Ivan Baranchyk a couple years ago. And we've seen him even before that fight with Jose Ramirez, who was the guy fighting Josh Taylor for the Battle of Undisputed at 140 last summer. And Jose Ramirez, we just saw beat Pedraza, arguably still Gervonta Davis. No, that's not still his best win, right? It's either Santa Cruz or Isaac Cruz. But for a while, people were always saying, Pedraza was Davis's best win. And for a while, that was Tank's best win. But Jose Zepeda fought a super close fight with Jose Ramirez. Some thought that Jose Ramirez deserved it. Some people thought Jose Zepeda deserved it. I thought that one could have gone either way. But this is going to be a good fight between Taylor and Jose Zepeda. So this isn't a bad move. And this is one of the division where it works for ESPN Top Rank, because Zepeda's already fighting over there. Josh Taylor is already fighting over there. So it's been easy for them to make fights, minus Regis Prograis on Top Rank ESPN. Okay, so range and jab, SGK 23. So I think you're speaking to the Devin Haney versus George Kambosos. How would Devin Haney beat George Kambosos? What would that look like? Range and jab. So he's got to do it. Are his legs that much better than George Kambosos to where he can control the range? Because I have the feeling that Lee Selby was trying to control, and granted, Lee Selby, especially in his later stages, is not Devin Haney, but he tried to control range against George Kambosos, was unable to do so. Teofimo Lopez couldn't control range worth a damn against George Kambosos. It's going to be interesting to see if Devin Haney can in fact do that. Ron Sizzle 402, what's up? Thank you. Yeah, you think it's going to be a draw? That's going to be, yeah, wow. Okay, so Ron Sizzle 402 thinks that it's going to be a draw between Kambosos and Haney, and then in the second fight, Haney will knock Junior out. Oh, so when you say Junior, let me know who you're talking about. Because if Haney loses to George Kambosos, they don't get it. They're not going to do a rematch. Not going to mute me that time, caller. But the rematch clause, and let me know if I am muted, by the way. I think I avoided that one. But the rematch only applies if Haney beats George Kambosos, is how I'd imagine it. Like, the B side doesn't get a rematch against the guy with more belts, right? Or is it a rematch either way? Is it a 2-fight deal regardless of what happens in the first fight? I don't know that to be the case, but I'm gonna look that up. Let's see what we got. What do we? So Kambosos might run into a hook. And, you know, Devin Haney does have a good hook. Remember when he knocked, it wasn't Abdullayev. Abdullayev is actually who he won the interim WBC belt against that was later elevated to the actual WBC title, right? And Zaire Abdullayev, that's a fight that's a win that's aging well for Devin Haney, because we just saw Zaire Abdullayev stop Jorge Linares just a couple months ago. That one was way under the radar, but I think it was Antonio Moran who Devin Haney just put their lights out. That was basically Devin Haney's best highlight knockout, you know. But Kambosos might run into a hook from Devin Haney. But the thing about Devin Haney that I think keeps him from being like a special great fighter is that his timing, to me, isn't as tricky as like Floyd Mayweather. And I think I was talking about this a little bit last time. Look at Floyd Mayweather's timing against Ricky Hatton in the middle rounds when he had Ricky Hatton in the middle of the ring. You know, Ricky Hatton started getting jabbed to the belly, getting right hand leads up top. And it just looked like Ricky Hatton was in the middle of the ring, and it looked like he might as well have been in the middle of the ocean against Floyd Mayweather. But it was like it's punching on the offbeat. It's basically, you know, fights fall into a rhythm. And you know how sometimes you'll be watching two like decent fighters, but they're not very good. And it's like the fight gets into a very predictable pace where it's like, damn, it's hard to imagine these guys are professionals sometimes. I mean, and obviously anybody who's put gloves on it and has even hit a heavy bag for like a couple minutes knows how tiring boxing is minute by minute. Probably the most tiring sport outside of like high school style wrestling. That's the most tiring minute by minute sport. But boxing, you get dead tired just throwing punches, let alone sparring or anything like that. But you see fights go into a pace, into a rhythm where everything starts looking predictable. You start seeing, you the viewer are able to start seeing the telegraph punches where it's like jab, 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 right hand, jab, right hand. And it's like, how does anybody get hit by this stuff, right? And there are reasons why they get hit by it still. You know, it's hard to defend punches coming at you, even if it's at a predictable rhythm. But what makes some of the trickiest and greatest fighters so great is the offbeat timing of their punch selection. So it's right when you think that they're not going to land is when they land. Watch, what is it? The first couple rounds of Miguel Cotto versus Zab Judah. Cotto won this fight. He hit Judah low in the beginning of the fight, and Judah seemed pretty hurt by that low blow. Ended up being a great fight. Judah ended up getting stopped by Miguel Cotto. But in the early rounds, Judah blasted Miguel Cotto in the same way that he blasted Costa Tszyu in the first round with the uppercut, with the left tricky uppercut, because the timing was so off. Like, it wasn't the predictable punch pattern that people are used to seeing. It's like, okay, I think that, because like that's why people throw feints as well. It's to get the guy to go like this, and then right after the guy goes like that, that's when you throw the punch. When this turns into that, because you only have like a millisecond when you're truly protecting yourself with the strength of your arms, and then it starts to relent just enough to get the punch through. I don't see Devin Haney at this point having the timing that is going to that's going to hit the guy with the punch they didn't see. I'm just not seeing that yet. I feel like even the stuff that Jojo Diaz was getting hit with was, yes, he was getting hit, and he was getting hit pretty frequently, but I thought that they were punches that he more or less saw. You know when somebody gets hit with a punch that they didn't see by their reaction, right? They either get dropped or they take a step back, or you could just see, even when they get just jabbed to the body when they weren't expecting it. I'm not seeing that trickery in Devin Haney's timing just yet. But And I think that it would take something like that to properly catch somebody as good as George Kambosos, or at least somebody as good as George Kambosos appears to be at this stage. We got a few more minutes. I definitely want to see some more, answer some more questions and comment on the comments, and maybe a couple more topics. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. This is always a blast talking with y'all. I mean, I love boxing. I can tell that you guys love boxing. Cambosos can get hit at awkward times, and I think it's going to take awkward timing to really catch, to catch him with the punch that he didn't see. Yeah, Iverson. Yeah, exactly. SGK. Allen Iverson, listed at 6 feet. He's about 5'10". So a couple other things. I'm just going to touch on this one really quickly. Is 175 now one of the best divisions in the sport? Like not only when you look at the champions, Artur Beterbiev, Dmitry Bivol, and I said this earlier, America, the United States in the last few years hasn't had a huge footprint at light heavyweight. It's been one of the more international divisions with a lot of Eastern Europeans, a lot of British fighters from African descent, a lot of British fighters from European descent. But it hasn't had a ton of U.S. success since, maybe like Andre Ward. But even then, it would usually be like one-offs. You would get Andre Ward. You would get Antonio Tarver, Bernard Hopkins, Roy Jones Jr. But the bulk of the competition has usually been international. And then you get the Canadians or Canadian Haitians like Adonis Stevenson, Jean Pascal, But I think that that's one of the best divisions right now, because not only do you have guys like Joe Smith Jr., Beterbiev, Dmitry Bivol, and then, Joshua Buatsi, then you've got Zurdo Ramirez, Gilberto Ramirez, right? And then you have Callum Smith, who just knocked out that, somebody who was fighting very good fighters just before that. It was somebody who, Dmitry Bivol, I think, had beaten maybe by decision. A pretty good fighter, just got his lights put out a few months ago by Callum Smith. But then even under that, you've got like Anthony Yarde, who is basically just emerging from that hard puncher, but we don't know how good he is. So he's just exceeded the Edgar Berlanga stage of his career, right? Which, by the way, I think Rolly Romero is still in that stage. I just did a preview video on Tank Davis versus Rolly Romero. That fight doesn't need to go down. I don't even know why they made that fight, aside from the fact that it's a grudge match and that PBC doesn't have a deep stable at 130, 135, or 140. They've had to get super creative with Tank Davis's matchmaking. Go up to 140 to fight Barrios. Try to invite Santa Cruz up from 126 to fight you at 130. Or, yeah, something like that. Or even though he had fought one fight against Miguel Vasquez or somebody just before that. But I don't love this fight between Tank Davis and Rolly Romero. And it's not... Rolly Romero, I'm not even saying that he's a terrible fighter. He's just an inexperienced fighter who looks like he's still building his skills. It doesn't even take a boxing expert to watch Rolly Romero and look at his vulnerabilities. He leaves himself so open. Even when he's just throwing a jab, his chin is high and he's off balance with like almost all of the significant punches that he's throwing, which with him, it's almost like all the punches that he's throwing are power punches, even when he throws a jab. So he'll throw the jab so hard that his feet kind of move a little bit, but he doesn't have the hand up usually. His hands are kind of like here, and he throws a power jab, but he doesn't keep his shoulders high, and he doesn't keep his chin down. I just don't see how this one doesn't result in a devastating knockout. Unless something crazy happens, like a lucky punch or Gervonta Davis. There's something wrong with Gervonta Davis or something. I just look at this as going no other way than a devastating knockout. Of course, this is boxing and anything could happen, but I'm just saying 9 times out of 10 with something like this is not going to end well for Rolly Romero. And I'm thinking, if Gervonta Davis is really about to walk from Mayweather Promotions, which he said he will, we'll see. Like negotiation-wise, we never know until it actually happens. He might stay under the PBC umbrella, but outside of Mayweather Promotions. Basically, just have the direct connection. Like if you're Lil Wayne, Young Money, you get out from Cash Money, move Young Money under Universal Records directly, something like that. But if Mayweather Promotions has big plans for Rolly Romero in the future, right? If he is an important fighter for them or for PBC, Why are they feeding him to Gervonta Davis? Like, I feel like this is the type of fight where not only can Rolly Romero lose in devastating fashion, but I feel like it could also hurt his career trajectory. I feel like this could hurt his development. This could be one of those, fights that fighters like never truly recover from, where they never pick up where they left off, and I'm not saying that it's going to be like that in a Tito Trinidad versus Fernando Vargas way, where Fernando Vargas was looking like a 154-pound emerging star, and then he fights, in my opinion, too soon with Tito Trinidad. Ends up being a great fight. He dropped Tito a couple of times, but Tito ended up doing what Tito Trinidad does, and that's hurt careers. He did it to William Joppy. He did it to David Reed. I don't know if y'all remember the Olympic gold medalist, the same year that like Floyd Mayweather was an Olympic bronze medalist. David Reed was like, he was looking like the golden child. I think his nickname had golden in it. Undefeated fighter for a while, ended up getting cracked by Tito Trinidad, was never the same after that. He looked like a shot Chad Dawson or a shot Riddick Bowe after that fight with Tito Trinidad. And he was looking so promising. I just don't see why you would do that to somebody who, unless they just want to take the money and run, unless Rolly Romero doesn't have boxing in his future plans, then that would justify it, just to cash out and go. But if he's looking to develop a career, why would you do this? That's my question. Yeah, Rolly would be wise to pull a Peter McNeely. That's somebody who fought Mike Tyson one of the times when Tyson had just gotten out of jail for a couple years. His first fight out of jail was Peter McNeely. And then I think it was Buster Mathis Jr., then Frank Bruno, before beating Bruce Seldon to win a belt the night that Tupac got killed, and then losing to Evander Holyfield, something like that. But yeah, he would be wise to pull a Peter McNeely. Basically, get hit with something that you kind of got hit with. Bruce Seldon, by the way, I think did the same thing. And then just kind of fall down, act like you're just like way out of sorts, and hope the ref like looks at your eyes and just, you start looking around, or you start, stumbling back, and they say, you know what, no. That to me, that's best case scenario for Rolly Romero. Another fight that's taking place, again, this Thursday, Otto Wallin versus Rydell Booker. Erislandy Lara. I might do another live this week on just the career that is Erislandy Lara's as he goes to 160. He's now 39 to 40 years old. He was a very good 154-pound fighter. For his sake, the fight that he needed to win, not even the Canelo fight, that one's controversial. They gave Canelo the decision. Some felt that Lara did enough to win. Some feel like he was a little too defensive and didn't do enough damage to win the fight. But it was a super close fight. He's about to fight O'Sullivan on the Tank Davis versus Romero undercard. But Erislandy Lara, the fight that he needed to win was the one against Jarrett Hurd. Because he was still like 30. He was in his mid-30s. But Jarrett Hurd was like in his late 20s, looking dangerous, but he was very vulnerable. Jarrett Hurd has always had a style that I didn't think would age well, because he would just like start throwing a bunch of punches, pressure the guy against the ropes, beat the hell out of him until they can't take it anymore, and just trust that he could take whatever punches that they're giving. I'm like, where's the defensive construct? Where's the head movement? He's just been kind of easy to hit. And you've seen how that has aged his career. We just saw him against Luis Arias look terrible on one of those Triller undercards, right? But Erislandy Lara, if he would have won that fight against Jarrett Hurd, then it would have been, well, he wouldn't have fought a Charlo anyway, probably, because they trained together. They were training together, just like Errol Spence and Jermell Charlo, trained together under Derrick James. Erislandy Lara is very close with the Charlos. He mentored them in a way. But Erislandy Lara was out of the Cuban boxing system, got kind of robbed in a fight versus Paul Williams, ended up having a good career, won a belt, but I feel like he didn't get all the juice out of the squeeze in his career and what he could have done if he were to have won another couple of fights that truly mattered. So that's kind of his legacy. Like, it's better than Kell Brooks, I think, because Kell Brooks, I feel the same way, didn't get the full juice out of the squeeze talent-wise. But one of the other things that Erislandy Lara has always had going against him was his style. like Demetrius Andrade, but different. I mean, Lara's a southpaw as well, but Lara was more of a mover than Demetrius Andrade. But as Lara's gotten older, like Andrade, he's been a little bit more offensive, where you've seen him get a couple, like, first round knockouts against scrubs, and he fought pretty well against Brian Castano. People didn't really know how good Castano was at that point. Ended up being, I believe, a draw. But yeah, Erislandy Lara, fighters get ducked for different reasons. If Lara was to be avoided, it would be because he's a guy who you cannot look good against, like Demetrius Andrade. Like, even if you beat Andrade, you wouldn't look great beating Andrade. I feel the same way about Erislandy Lara. And then you have other guys who get ducked because they are just buzzsaws and are just like dangerous fighters who people would rather stay away from. But yeah, a very interesting career for Erislandy Lara. Yeah, Lara's the I-Corte, even though I-Corte was just known for having the bazooka jab, right? Having the very Rocket Andretti. What is good? I think I remember you from Boxing Waves live chat, right? And I think that Boxing Wave actually commented on the dope name. He's like, yeah, I like that, Rocket Andretti. Yeah, if Canelo doesn't fight a smart fight with Triple G, okay, so you're saying that Canelo does need to be on top of his game to beat Triple G, even at this stage of their careers. I agree with that. I just think he knows better than to slack off. I think, having been in the ring for 24 rounds with Triple G, which, I mean, it's amazing. Like, hats off to both of them for being in the ring with each other and neither of them hitting the canvas once. Think about that. Like, because I thought going into the first fight between Triple G and Canelo, I thought Triple G was going to stop Canelo. Canelo had been flirting a little bit with 160 against the smaller Miguel Cotto, and then had that kind of freak show fight against, the never can make weight, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. So he wasn't a truly established 160 guy. So I'm thinking, now he's fighting Triple G? Yeah, Triple G's going to eat him alive. I thought that was going to be the case. So even if Canelo, in my book, didn't deserve a win or a draw, he still exceeded my expectations. But with that said, he fought 24 rounds with Triple G and didn't taste the canvas once. To me, that in itself is amazing. And vice versa. Now, knowing what we know about Canelo and how good he is, the fact that Triple G never tasted the canvas in 24 rounds against Canelo. Davis knocks Raleigh out in the knocks Raleigh. Ron Sizzle 402 said Davis knocks Raleigh out of the world, off the globe. Knows that later rounds. Let's be honest. Bud Crawford is the best in the world. Bud Crawford is definitely one of the best. Okay, so this will be another conversation for another day. I actually still have Canelo as my #1 pound-for-pound fighter. I get why anybody wouldn't, but I didn't drop him after the loss with up at 175 with Dimitri Bivol. I actually have Errol Spence #2, Terrence Crawford #3. We'll have like this. We'll have deeper Spence Crawford discussions in future chats and videos and stuff, because first of all, they just need to fight and just settle all doubt, right? Just settle the score. But I think that the track record for Errol Spence has still been a bit more impressive over the past 6 to 8 years than Terrence Crawford's has. And I've been watching a lot of Crawford since he was fighting like Breedis Prescott down at 135 and stuff. Like Crawford, I had no idea that he was going to end up being this good, to be honest with you. Remember, he was winning a lot of those fights via decision until he went to 140 and started knocking out like the Felix Diaz's, Thomas Delorme, Julius Ndongo. I mean, he did also beat Yorki's Gamboa, still a post-prime Gamboa. Gamboa was at his best down at 126, in my opinion. But he was still just getting increasingly impressive. That's what I'll say about Terrence Crawford. He has gotten better every division he's gone up, I feel. Yeah, so Usyk as pound-for-pound #1, I wouldn't hate that. I wouldn't hate that. It's almost like cruiserweight never gets full respect. Like if somebody wins a belt or does something great at cruiserweight, it's almost like they get like partial credit for some reason. I mean, I know why those reasons are, but Usyk fought good fighters, like really good fighters. It was some of the best cruiserweights, like Maris Breedis, Murat Gassiev. He was Tony Bellew, great at cruiserweight, and then he did what he did at heavyweight. I wouldn't have a problem with Usyk at #1 pound for pound. I personally have him as my number 5, just behind Tyson Fury. Some people don't include heavyweights in their pound for pound. I get it. I would adjust mine if those are the rules, but I include heavyweights in certain cases, and I included Tyson Fury in mine. So we're about to wrap this one up, fellas. Thank you once again for joining us. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Benny Bronx said the future is bright. Xander Zayas, super exciting young fighter. Puerto Rican fighter. Edgar Berlanga, yes. Boots Ennis, Shakur Stevenson. I mean, we were just talking about Janibek, you know, Stanionis. I mean, there's so many fighters that get me excited about the future of boxing. And we could keep on naming them, and we still be missing some. That's how good the future is looking. And they're guys also who were highly touted, who might have hit a stumble, like Beck Bully, Melikuziev or something, might still go on to have a good career. A lot of people start to write somebody off once they taste like one L. No, people can recover and still, you know, fully realize their talents. Yeah, you know, there does need to be a panel. I feel like a lot of I feel like a lot of the content creators who have, like, for instance, like way more followings than I currently have. Like, let's say like Boxing Wave. Richard Dwyer has always been one of my favorite. That's been one of my favorite. Richard Dwyer, Contender Regime. I would like to see something like a, you know, like a 4 square and boxes and some sort of like a fight panel. I think that would be kind of interesting. Blue Blood. In the future, would I interview fighters? I would interview fighters. I wouldn't shill for fighters, but I also wouldn't disrespect fighters. I'm not big on clickbait. You know what I mean? I get why some people will do something like super demonstrative, and not everybody who does something super demonstrative is even clickbait. But I feel, and I'm not adverse to drama. If drama is warranted and there's like a story or a narrative that needs to be exposed, I'll get into that, and I'll ask like honest questions to the fighters in terms of like why, you know, they chose to fight this person and not this person, or just any, you know, tough question. I would be willing to ask that. So I would want to be mindful going into interviews that I don't shift from calling balls and strikes and really trying to give it as I see it to trying to make friends, like with the fighters, and trying to get in good and be scared of offending a fighter. I wouldn't want to do it like that. So if I was to interview, I would certainly be respectful. I treat people, you know, you give what you get, right? But I wouldn't totally roll over either. So I would try to make it as compelling, as interesting, as insightful, and I would try to create some sort of environment where the fighter feels comfortable enough to just kind of shoot it straight, and perhaps, you know, be more revealing than they would be with an interviewer that they might not have liked. Like, I've heard a lot of Mike Coppinger interviews where the fighter doesn't like the interviewer. And Coppinger isn't the only one. And he actually usually has a good rapport with the fighters. But there are others, you know, who I think Chris Mannix sometimes pisses some fighters off too. They would ban me. They would ban you from media events if you ask tough questions. See, I haven't been in the media rooms to kind of know what the unspoken rules are, or who gets to ask what, or what questions are off the table. So I don't know too much about the politics involved with that. You heard today that Pacquiao's coming back. Well, he just lost that election, right? So the question is, does he come back? If Pacquiao comes back, does he come back and fight important fights against elite fighters? Like, I don't even know if I want to see Pacquiao fight like a Boots Ennis or something like that, you know? Or Virgil Ortiz. Even though, I mean, it'd probably be a great fight. I would love to see Virgil Ortiz versus Boots Ennis. Or is he going to fight a rematch with Floyd Mayweather and just cash the hell out? You know, I don't know. At 43, 44 now. Leo said Mannix is annoying. You know, I do listen to his podcast, though. I listen to his podcast. I usually listen to the first half of the podcast, where he usually has like Keith Idec or somebody like that on. Somebody else who's a boxing commentator, a non-fighter, unless it's like Sergio Mora, he'll have Mora on. Then in the second half of the podcast, he'll have an interview with the fighter. To me, that part is usually a little bit less interesting than when the two boxing heads are just talking shop or just talking boxing and just shooting it straight, right? He usually has some pretty good guests with that. I also like Morning Combat with Luke Thomas and Brian Campbell. They do a lot of MMA too, so it's a lot of crossover. Yeah, good looking out. I'll probably reach out, for some assistance with that, SGK. Thank you for that. I would want to see a bronze bomber Deontay Wilder come back. If there's, here's the thing. When people see somebody gets like beaten up and stopped in a fight, they start to look at that fighter like the other guys in the top 6 would also beat him. No, I think and I have thought even before Dillian White got knocked out against Tyson Fury, I would have still picked, even after the 2 losses to Tyson Fury, I would have picked Deontay Wilder over, Joseph Parker, over Dillian White, probably over Andy Ruiz. We already know against Luis Ortiz, people sometimes make too much out of one or a couple events. These other guys aren't Tyson Fury, you know what I mean? And Deontay Wilder is still, pound for pound, one of the hardest punchers in boxing history, any era. And he's, say what you want about his lack of skills, he is able to find enough opportunities to deploy that deadly right hand to where he knocked everybody not named Tyson Fury out. And to Deontay Wilder's credit, he scored 2 knockdowns on Tyson Fury in 2 different fights. So, yeah, Tyson Fury is great. But one of the things that make him so great is the fact that he had those 3 fights with Deontay Wilder. So with people who despise Wilder, I'm saying discredit Wilder and boost Fury, you can't do both at the same time. The opponent quality is what makes legacy. So the fact that Tyson Fury had those fights with Deontay Wilder are the biggest thing to date that boosts his legacy. So I think that is a trilogy that elevated both fighters ultimately, even if Deontay Wilder looked totally outmatched in that second of the 3 fights. Can Wilder beat Joe Joyce? Now, that's a tough question. I wanted to see Joe Joyce against anybody but Joseph Parker, and what does it look like we're about to get? It looks like we're about to get Joe Joyce versus Joseph Parker, unfortunately. That's just a style thing that I don't love between Joyce and Parker. I like them both individually, even though I think that Joseph Parker smiles a little bit too much during the fight, is a little bit too willing to tap gloves after every round. I get it. He's just a genuinely nice guy, but it's like, man, sometimes I just wish he had more fire in him, He showed some fire against, Derek Chisora in that rematch. I'll say that. But I think that he plays a little too friendly too often. I want to thank everybody once again for tuning into this. This has been a blast. Thank you, Hot Facts with Robert Reese, Benny Bronx, Rocket Andretti, SGK 23 TV. Oh, by the way, so I just did if you haven't, feel free to check out the Davis versus Romero preview. I'm about to do a Haney versus Kambosos one. I'll probably do an Arislandi Lara live coming up soon. If you're a music junkie, I love music. I have a channel called Woog Talks Music. I talk pretty much cross genre, anything from hip hop to rock to indie rock to classic rock, even some ambient and jazz. It's just all kinds of music. I love music. I love music almost as much as I love boxing, if not as much. Rocket Andretti, thank you for coming through. Leo, thank you again for Leo DeBrow. Thank you for coming through. Ron Sizzle 402, thank you. Heck yeah, I can't wait to do this again. Big Cheese, thank you. EK, good looking out. Benjamin Tucker, thank you. Ricky Conley, thank you. MAW, thank you. Edward Espinoza, thank you. And I think I already shouted out Benny Bronx, but thanks again, Benny. Yeah, I just reached out today, so I appreciate you coming through like on short notice like that. In fact, a few of y'all came through on pretty short notice, and I really appreciate that. Heck yeah. Like the video if you haven't liked the chat, because with the chats usually go and play, and I'm guilty of the same thing. I'll go into a chat and then I'll forget to like sometimes because I was on the chat scroll, but it's like you have to get out of the chat scroll to even like it. So yeah, if you haven't liked it, that'd be fantastic. Appreciate that. And thanks for mentioning that, SGK. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. I get so wrapped up in the narratives and just talking shop, talking boxing. But yeah, I'll talk to y'all soon. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your week. Stay safe out there. Peace.